Hello and welcome to NewsClick. India and China are facing each other off again in what is an unprecedented crisis of late, perhaps since the Sumdorong Chu incident close to 2 decades ago, and later the standoff on the Daulat Beg Oldie. This incident seems to have escalated already to a point where relations between the two countries are being seriously affected. To talk about this, NewsClick has with us today retired Navy Commander Atul Bharadwaj. Welcome, Atul.
Thank you, Raghu.
Tell our viewers what the standoff is about and how it has reached this stage.
You know, there is a disputed territory between Bhutan and China. Both Bhutan and China are in talks to resolve the issue. Now, the present problem is in an area called Doklam, which is a disputed territory, as I said, between the two countries. Now, India gets involved in it because Bhutan is an ally of India, and India has some treaties with it which say that it will basically come in for its help in case it is needed. Now, in this particular case, it is said that China was building a road and coming right up to Doklam. Now, this particular plateau which China wanted to reach up to basically overlooks our Siliguri corridor, which connects the mainland to the northeast. So, the Indians feel that if China comes and occupies this disputed territory and reaches up to this place, then they will have a strategic advantage, that they would be able to use their artillery guns, and in case of an hostility, disrupt the entire corridor. So, India's interest is that. Bhutan's interest is primarily in negotiating with China and reaching a stage where they are able to have a proper demarcation of their boundaries. In this particular case, since China had started building a road, the sudden news that we heard was that Indian military has moved into the Doklam and occupied the particular place to prevent any further Chinese developments in those areas. So, that is primarily the dispute. The Chinese are saying that India has come into their sovereign territory.
Right. Over which there is obviously a disagreement.
Over which there is a disagreement. Because nobody can occupy that territory at the moment. Neither China can occupy, nor Bhutan can occupy, nor India. Of course, India is a third party in the whole game.
If I recall, the first physical clash took place between soldiers of the Royal Bhutan Army and the Chinese soldiers. They were physical pushing of each other, and as you know, none of the three parties in that valley carry arms with them. So, they are just sitting there in their tents, no gun barrels pointing at each other. So, they just physically are shoving. But the first clash took place between the Bhutan army and the Chinese army. And that's the situation where Indian forces have intervened.
So, what we hear basically in the media is, this is what we primarily hear in the media, and we got aware of the entire situation once the Indian forces had actually moved into that particular area, and that's where the Chinese began to react, and the entire issue flared up.
Sure.
Now, India has been relatively quiet in this particular issue. Even our media has been generally been subdued on this particular issue. So, because we primarily feel that we are in a little more advantageous situation at the moment, because we prevented Chinese from achieving their aims, and we are withholding our ground at the moment. What we need to ask ourselves is, what were those diplomatic moves made prior to India escalating it to military levels. We have our military presence there. We also see that Chinese are now making some diplomatic moves, some using some harsh language. But what language did India use? What diplomatic language did India use prior to sending its troops there? Now, how did that happen? How did we reach that stage of escalation where militaries got involved and diplomacy took a backseat? Now, that answer we are not able to find till now.
Okay. China is holding virtually press briefings every day in China, issuing fairly detailed statements as to what is happening and so on, giving its position. India's messaging seems to be far more silent on this issue. Do you think this is a calculated move on India's part, or should they have been more forthcoming and made their position public better?
No, as I said, India has been pretty reticent about this entire issue. They played their cards close to the chest, because one reason of obvious is that India is, it's not the Indian territory which is at stake at the moment. Nor have the Chinese actually, infringed on any particular Indian territory. The Indians have actually moved in, so Indians are actually holding the cards close to the chest. So they feel that they are in an advantageous position. Let the Chinese make the noise and let the Chinese give the concessions to us.
Okay. And the Chinese are saying Indian troops must withdraw as a precondition to any discussions or negotiations.
Yeah. So they want this territory to be vacated before any negotiations to happen.
Yeah, but that also begs the question, this territory is a disputed territory, and if it is to be vacated, it's to be vacated by all parties to the dispute.
What we've not heard is the Chinese military occupying it.
Well, the reports today in the Indian press says that the field commander locally in the army has said, this is now beyond us. The army cannot do anything more. This is now a matter which has to be resolved by the political leadership. So we are now have no further role to play.
So that effectively basically means, that India, if it has to withdraw from that particular place, which could be a solution. If India was to occupy it, then the whole continue to occupy it militarily, then the whole thing escalates to a next level. The Chinese may take some other military steps, and then how to de-escalate that entire situation would be a problem. Because the militaries have to go back. If we have to find a solution, the militaries have to go back from both sides.
Yes.
And since India is in larger number in a territory which is in a foreign territory, so first probably the steps could be taken that both withdraw at the same time probably.
Let me ask a related question. We've not seen in India so much. If this had involved Pakistan, we would have seen the media reacting far more vigorously. But there is this typical mood which is so common these days of whipping up hyper-nationalist sentiments on the Indian side, ratcheting up the rhetoric. But this time we've also noticed, at least vis-a-vis India, a similar kind of hyper-nationalist rhetoric in sections of the press and social media in China as well.
China, of course, is now, is projecting itself to be the victim in this particular case. And India is probably assuming itself to be the victor. So it's playing the game in a manner that, it's playing a very subtle game. It's a game of brinkmanship, if you actually see in the whole game which is going on. India feels it's in a better position, so it'll behave more maturely. It'll control the levers of escalation and de-escalation. Basically, it feels that it has the levers to de-escalate or to escalate the situation. So they are playing the game very, in a very subtle manner. On the other hand, China feels that it needs to bring in its public opinion into the entire game, and take the issue to the next level, because they've been hurt. They are showing that they've been hurt more, and India has actually not been hurt in that sense. The problem with India is that we're not very clear about what is the strategic importance in this whole game. Even if suppose we are a victor in this particular game, what is the strategic advantages that we are going to gain? One question is that, did Indian military move in? Was it afraid that Bhutan could get into some kind of an arrangement with China and give up some other, take some other large chunk of territory and give Doklam and settle the issue with China? China has the economic levers with it. In the surrounding areas, if you see with Nepal, and other smaller players in the region, they are attracted to China because China has the money, China has the economic power, and it is reaching out to them. India in that sense cannot match the Chinese kind of an economic power. It cannot match the amount of money which China can put into another country's economy. So there is a kind of an attraction which most of these countries are feeling towards China, and India is little afraid of that. India is paranoid about that.
If one looks at recent development, say over the last decade or so, we see that China has upped the ante with India vis-a-vis Arunachal Pradesh, vis-a-vis the Dalai Lama, his visit to Arunachal. There is a far more strident Chinese position on this, and the issue has been escalated with the stapled visas and so on. Why is it, do you think, that India and China, rather than moving forward towards resolution of the boundary issues, seem to be actually going backwards?
If you actually see, before this crisis happened, both India and the relationship, this bilateral relationship, was at its lowest ebb. It had gone down to such an extent, when India refused to join the Belt and Road Initiative Forum, and there is no probably, I would say, an aspiration to have good relations with China. I will look at it more from Indian perspective, because I read India more and I meet Indians more on this particular issue. So one gets a feeling that there is no initiative coming from India to have good relations or to improve relations with China. Our trade, which is about $70 billion, had stood where it was. Even Vietnam, a smaller country, trades much more with China than what we do. Then there are constant, calls in India which say that we must boycott Chinese goods, and a whole lot of. Then we use the Dalai Lama card also. So we don't want a good relationship with China. Our strategy is not clear as to what is it that we want from China, nor are we willing to understand China, what kind of a power it is. So in that sense, to expect the relationships to grow, is asking for too much. Just 3 years back, Xi Jinping, when he had come to Delhi, he was swinging with Modi. But see the rate of deterioration of the relationship. In 3 years, we've now come to a stage where talking war.
Yeah.
Now that is, that represents a failure of diplomacy, probably on both parts.
Yes.
And why has diplomacy taken a back seat in this entire bilateral relationship? And why is military beginning to play a larger role in this game is a question that we need to ask.
Right.
And is it in our interest to let it escalate up to the military level?
Thank you, Commander Bharadwaj. I hope we don't have occasion to return to this topic soon, that the situation does de-escalate and we can get back to talking about improving relations between India and China. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
one of the coldest spots in Asia, continues to heat up. The Himalayan plateau of Doklam in an area China claims as its sovereign territory. It says Indian troops who've now been there for a month are trespassing and need to retreat.
We once again urge the Indian side to withdraw its border guards to behind the borderline immediately and unconditionally and to settle the incident properly.
In mid-June, a Chinese construction firm, reinforced by a team of unarmed Chinese soldiers, had been building a road through the valley, a road that China insists was being built peacefully, when Indian soldiers moved in to block it. They had been based next door in the Kingdom of Bhutan. The small nation also claims the territory and asked its neighbor India to intervene. Since then, more troops have arrived. China says there will be no dialogue until they all leave. India is standing its ground, but insists the standoff will be resolved without any, quote, muscle flexing.
As far as Doklam area issue is concerned, we have diplomatic channels available. The embassies are there in both countries, and those channels will continue to be used.
More than 50 years ago, China and India fought a month-long war, again over a road. Last week, the Indian Defense Minister Arun Jaitley issued a rather ominous warning for China, saying, quote, "The situation of 1962 was different, and India of 2017 is different," a reference, some say, to modern India's nuclear arsenal. China has nukes as well. Officials from Delhi are scheduled to be in Beijing later this month for a meeting of the BRICS countries. The standoff will likely be high on the agenda. Some experts predict it may simply carry on until the winter, when freezing weather will force everyone to go home.
Now, this ongoing incident highlights the sticky relations between Asia's two giant powerhouses. Together, they account for nearly 40% of the world's population and share nearly 4,000 kilometers of unmanned border. Now, both sides know this could be just a small flare-up or perhaps the spark that ignites a much bigger fire. Back to you.
पुणी भारत को नाली आखि देखाई चीन बड़ युद्ध पर भारत को चेतावनी देछि चीन डोकलाम को निज अंचल बोली चीन दाबी करने सहित तुरंत भारत एठारू निज सेना प्रत्याहार करू बोली कहिछि नचेत युद्ध हेबो बोली धमक देछि चीन गतकाली राजधानी बेजिंग ठारे निज राष्ट्रदूत मानक सहित चीन सरकार रुद्धद्वार बैठक करिसेंति बैठक रे राष्ट्रदूत मानकू डोकलाम घटनार विवरणी प्रदान करा जायछि विवादीय अंचल चीन रो अंशविशेष एवं राजनीतिक फायदा पाई भारत एठारे सेना प्रवेश करुछि बोली विश्व को जणाइबार उद्यम करुछि चीन तेबे निजर सार्वभौमत्व तथा अखंडता बजाय रखिबा पाई चीन सेना कहारी को छाड़िबो नाही बोली वैदेशिक मुखपात्र लू कांग कहिसंती डोकलाम को चीन निज भूखंड कहउथुबा बेले यह भूटान अंशविशेष बोली भारत एवं भूटान कहि आसुचंती बा दाबी करि आसुचंती ए अंचल रे चीन सेनार प्रवेश को नहीं गत किछि दिन हैला उत्तेजनामूलक परिवेश सृष्टि हेबारे लागिछि तबे गत जून 16 रु डोकलाम अंचल रे चीन रास्ता निर्माण कार्य को मध्य बंद करिछि भारतीय सेना।